Okay, so I am Anna Brown. I'm the manager at Katee Budget Books. I've been with the store for 12 years, and we have hosted a lot of events, but not a whole lot that I have legitimately screamed in the middle of the store when I found out they're happening. So I am really excited to introduce you to these two authors this evening. We are here, of course, to celebrate the launch of Wicked Beauty, the third book in the Dark Olympus series by Katee Robert, who is a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of contemporary romance and romantic suspense. Entertainment Weekly calls her writing unspeakably hot, and they are not wrong. Her books have sold over 1 million copies. She lives in the Pacific Northwest with her husband, children, a cat who thinks he's a dog, and 2 Great Danes who think they're lap dogs, in the way of all big dogs, I think. And we are so excited to have Katee tonight. And she is going to be in conversation with Miss Beverly Jenkins, who is the recipient of the 2018 Michigan Author Award, the 2017 Romance Writers of America Lifetime Achievement Award, which I was blessed to be at the conference to see her receive. She is a beautiful speaker. I'm so glad she's a conversation partner. And the 2016 Romantic Time Reviewer's Choice Award for Historical Romance. She has been nominated for the NAACP Image Award in Literature and was featured both in the documentary Love Between the Covers and on CBS Sunday Morning. Her work has been praised by the Wall Street Journal, People Magazine, and NPR. So without further ado, I give you Katee Robert and Miss Beverly Jenkins.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you. I'm so excited.
I am too. Let's do a. So I guess we should get started, huh, Katee?
Yeah.
Okay. My first question. Most writers are avid readers growing up. Do you put yourself in that category? Were you an avid reader growing up?
Oh yeah. I started my grandma. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents when I was a kid, and my grandma read me the book Heidi. Probably it didn't age super well, but read it a lot of times, enough that I had it almost memorized. And then from there, once I was old enough to start picking my own books, I spent just a ton of time in libraries, and I inhaled Tamora Pierce's books, and then eventually found my way to adult fantasy with Sarah Douglas and Elizabeth Hayden, and some of those early, or I guess late 90s fantasy authors. But I've always been a reader, and I like the escapism of it, and just being able to step out and immerse myself in these other worlds and other points of views, and usually learn a lot just because authors, we do our research.
Yeah, we do. And libraries are so valuable. I mean, for me being a poor kid, growing up in Detroit, we had a lot of love and not a lot of money. And libraries are just the bomb. So yeah.
They're actually how I found romance, because my mom read suspense and thrillers, and she was really into Iris Johansen, and so I went to the library and was like, what else has this author written?
Mm-hmm.
And I found her historical romance, which are really hot books. I recently reread, or by recently, a couple of years ago now, reread the first romance novel I'd ever read, which was The Magnificent Rogue. And I was like, certainly it felt hot because I was 13 or ish when I read it. Nope, that book is a scorcher. That's a saucy book.
Yeah, that's one of the questions down the page here about, what brought you to romance. So besides Miss Iris, what else brought you to romance?
So at the time, I inhaled her backlist, but then I didn't really realize that romance was a genre. I was just like, oh, she wrote these books. That's really cool. And then I kind of wandered off into urban fantasy because that was really hot at the time and it was just everywhere. Mm-hmm. But a few years into that, realized that the thing that I liked most about urban fantasy was the romantic subplots. And then I found, oh goodness, I can't even remember who it was, but somebody was writing paranormal romance at that point. I was like, oh, it's a different couple in each book. And I get the saucy stuff and I get the happily ever afters. And this is what I like. And it turns out that's romance. And there's an entire genre of people writing romance that all these books that I could ever read And that's sort of how I like my roundabout way of coming into like romance properly. Yeah, and then I've never looked back.
Yeah. So what do you think brings people to our genre? What is it about romance that, people get hooked and, and then they read, we've got some of the most avid readers and some of the most dedicated readers. What do you think is why are they that way? What is it about our books that
I think it's ultimately about hope and just like comfort, and that like, because I mean, the very thing that so many non-romance folk criticize the genre for, which is it's so predictable and it's so, trope heavy and whatnot. Those are the things that readers find so comforting, because they know that even if they go in and it's going to be like angsty or a slow burn or literally anything, that they have that soft landing at the end, and that allows you to read and feel safe while reading it, because that like in a proper romance, the main character is not going to die terribly
right?
or be sacrificed or they're not going to break up at the end. And so you can just kind of enjoy the rhythm of that story and like the highs and the lows, knowing that when you get to the end, you're going to feel really good.
Yeah. Did you always want to be a storyteller or a writer?
I did. I didn't really realize, I mean, I knew obviously there was a thing that people did as a job, but it wasn't until I got married very early and had 2 babies under 2, and was living in Germany because my now ex-husband was a military man, or I guess he still is, and kind of was going a little batty. And so that was right around the time that Stephanie Meyer, like the Twilight series, I think the 3rd book had like just come out, and I got really into her story of like how she got published, and I was like, wow, like this is, if she did it, maybe I could do it. Not realizing in my sweet baby angel brain that is not a normal story of how to get published, and not like a thing that happens to normal people. And lo and behold, it took me 8 books before I was able to sell one. But just like that, oh, like maybe I could do this. And then I sort of fell into the community, like kind of sideways, and like realized that there's a lot of people that want to write to be published, and like it can be such a welcoming community, like, and it was so like, I still am in contact with a couple of my critique partners from way back then that we had found each other like in a blog post comments, because like blogs were big back then. And so there's still a couple of them around that I'm just like, hey, you're doing good and I'm doing good, like high five, we did it, we're here.
Yeah. So what were those early books like? Were they suspense? Were they straight romance? Were they paranormal? Were they
the first one I wrote, and I feel like a lot of people start with, it was like a portal fantasy romance that was like just the most ridiculous, like no, not a single unique feature in it. It kind of tried to be spicy, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And then I sort of veered off into young adult for a while, but again, like I was always headed towards romance. I just didn't really understand that that's where I was headed until I wrote a sci-fi romance, which is no longer in print, but it's the first book that I sold. And then I realized like, oh, like I can just write the part of the story that I love the most as the whole book. Like that could be the thing that I can do. And it turns out that's what I really like. And I'm a little slow on the uptake sometimes, so it took me a while to figure it out.
That's okay. When I turned in, when Avon bought the song, Ellen Edwards, love her to death, bless her heart. She said, Bev, we need a story. We need more than, like you say, the parts you want to write. We need a story. And I was like, huh, you need a story? It's like, yeah, we need a story. So I understand that. So when did you first get published?
I sold my first book at the end of 2011.
Okay.
And while that was still, we'd done edits on it, it was going to come out. The publisher at the time, because 50 Shades was like doing numbers. And that was kind of at the beginning or around the bouts of the independent publishing gold rush, where like you could just like put a book out and like make six figures, and it was wild.
Right.
And the publisher I was with at the time was like, do you want to do this full time? And I was like, yes, I hate my job. I'm working minimum wage. I'm not qualified to do anything. I would love to do this full time. And so they were launching a category line, basically the equivalent of Harlequin Blaze. And they're like, we would like you to be one of the launch titles, like if you can write the book in time. And I was like, I'm in, let's do it. And it was just, right time, right place, right book. And it did really well. And thankfully I've been doing it full time since.
That's great. Yeah. Right talent too. Because you have to have the talent in order to be able to take advantage of being in the right place at the right time. So
yeah, it's that luck is a lot of unpaid hours of,
yeah. Yeah, you're
putting
right.
in the craft.
Yeah. Yeah, because you don't usually just, I had book that, and I tell this a lot when I do writing workshops. My very, very first book that I sent to Avon before they bought Night Song was probably 85. That book was so bad. I tell people the rejection letter almost beat me home from the post office when I manuscript. So, you got to have everything. And I didn't know what I was doing. You got to have everything in place. So did you do any independent publishing before you sold that book?
No, I was really scared of independent publishing because I, as a lot of like neurodivergent folk, I have ADHD, and I grew up and there was a lot of like, you're a really smart kid, but you're real dumb when it comes to like actually like running your life. And so I had kind of internalized that and was like, well, I can't manage my own career and I can't do the things that are required to like successfully independently publish. And then, and it was a little more challenging at that time to like format your book. You had to like actually know your way around a computer.
Right.
But since then it's become a lot more accessible. And so I started independently publishing in 2019, and that's probably like 60 to 75% of my publishing schedule these days is independent.
Okay. So did you have an agent when you started?
No, which I do not recommend. Because I had, I tried to go the agent route, and my stuff was always just a little bit hard to market because, you get that like getting that foot through the door was just not quite, I just was never with the right project. And so the small publisher signed me, which was, a blessing, and it got me where I am now. But at the same time, I never recommend to authors to sign contracts that an agent or at least a lawyer hasn't looked over, because the only person looking out for you is you, and the publisher is looking out for themselves. And it's very easy to miss, innocent little clauses that aren't really that innocent.
Yeah, that's good advice for all of you aspiring writers out there. Sometimes you want to go it alone, but probably should have somebody to hold your hand while especially when you're brand new. Especially when you're brand new.
Yeah, because the power dynamic can be so challenging to navigate as a new author, because you're just so grateful to be published that you put up with a lot of nonsense, and having a good agent in your corner can help negate some of that nonsense.
Right. Yeah. Because there's a lot of snakes out there, who are trying to steal your dreams and all that, but that's for a whole different conversation. All right, back to being Oprah here. Okay, so you write about monsters and menages and mafia types and books that have affairs with dads of friends, friends of husbands, guardians and dragons, among other things. And as was pointed out earlier, Entertainment Weekly calls your work unspeakably hot, and it is. That you don't inhibit yourself is one of the things I admire most about you as a writer. Walking on the wild side takes confidence, girl, mental strength, and courage. Did you always plan to push the envelope with your stories, or is it a confidence that grew as you grew as a writer?
It definitely grew as I grew as a writer. With my first, because I was heavily in category romance when I like was first establishing my career, and there's a lot of rules and a lot of like, you can't do this and you can't do that, because you have to, stay within the boundaries of that
Right.
imprint. And while I found that a fun challenge, it was also like incredibly limiting. And so, and I kind of internalized a lot of that of like, oh, I want to do other things. Like maybe that makes, that's not a thing that's actually marketable. And then I got my agent sort of on accident. Like it was the most ridiculous thing. I actually stood her up on accident, and she sought me out and was like, hey, I'd love to talk to you. But during, like, after she signed me, I was like, I would like to write a mafia romance. And she's like, well, I don't actually like mafia romance, but, write it, send it to me. Like, I'll take a look. We'll just see where it's at.
Yeah.
And so I just wrote the most, at the time, unhinged for me, because it's like the heroine shoots her, not the hero, sorry, shoots her fiance in the first chapter. And I was like, someone is going to tell me no. Someone's going to be like, you can't do this. She's unlikable. It's bad. Because that, was the term we threw around a lot, is like unlikable heroine.
Right. Yeah.
And my agent's like, I love it. Let's go on submission. I was like, oh, what? And then I was like, surely some editor somewhere is going to be like, no, absolutely not. And it turns out they didn't. And so I was able to sell that series, which became the O'Malley series. But even then, in traditional, there's a lot of people telling you no, even if your editor is super supportive, you have to get it past marketing, past like all the way down past the booksellers. And when the market shifted to rom-coms, I couldn't shift with it, because I cannot write a rom-com. I tried, thank the sweet baby Jesus, I did not sell it because it's not a good fit for me.
Yeah.
And so, my income dropped, and I was like, I'm going to have to get a real job, but I'm not qualified to do anything like at all. Like I'm going to have to work at a minimum wage, which there's nothing wrong with, but I need to like pay my part of the bills. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go indie, and I'm going to go indie like really hard and just try to make up this drop in income. And I was, because when you churn in traditional and try to chase the market and try to do the thing that's like marketable, you burn out, because we're such a creative job that like you have to have that joy. And if you don't have that joy, it's a recipe for disaster. And so I was at that point where I was just like, the well was dry. There was nothing. And it was right at the time that Harlequin was putting out those silly, lovely little like book boyfriend trailer things. There was like a Viking.
Yeah,
and the Prince one like cracked me up, because the lady looks so unsure that she was just like, I don't like, you could tell that she's like, I'm not sure if I like this. Yeah. And I was like, what if this happened and it was like a prince, and like, what if his bodyguard was involved? And like, I just wrote this like 18,000 word novella out of nowhere, and it felt so freeing. And it was like, there was no one telling me no, and no one being like, you can't do this, no one's going to buy this, because it was just for me.
Yeah.
And it turns out that indie is a really good place for that, because you don't have to sell it to an editor, to marketing, to the booksellers, because the readers are there.
Yeah.
And you can niche down really intensely and find a readership that's maybe not like the most massive one, but is very loyal and like likes what they like.
Right.
And it just became this thing that I was like, I'm just going to chase joy. I'm going to do the thing that brings me joy, and ideally in the most marketable way possible, because I do have bills. And then somehow along the way became me pushing the envelope and being like, am I going too far? And every time I feel like I'm going too far, it's like almost like I'm leveling up, because it's like, how do I go too far but make it in a way that's like enjoyable for everyone, not just for shock value. And it's just, I just am so self-indulgent when I write now. Like the monster romance thing came out because I was like, I read Jack Harbin's His Beauty and loved it. And I was like, this book is so good. Like, I want more like this. But there wasn't anything quite like that in the market that I could find. I mean, and I eventually did find some really great stuff. Like there's some really great stuff. But I was like, well, I want, now that I've read all this monster romance, I want to write monster romance. And the thing I love about like our history in the romance genre is the like dramatic, over the top clinch covers that were like illustrated and like aren't a thing that we do anymore, really.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I am in charge of the decisions. And so this is something I want to do for me. And if no one buys it, it'll be something I enjoyed. And so I just packaged it like with that over like very dramatic clinch cover. And yeah, it's been a lot of decisions that are just like, I'm making this decision because yes, it is marketable. And yes, I know that there's an audience for it because I pay attention, but it brings me joy. And so that's really translating in the books that I'm telling or that I'm writing. And I think that readers kind of can tell.
Yeah. Toni Morrison always said that, if there's a book out there, well, if there isn't a book out there that you want to read, then you get to write it yourself. And that's sort of what you've embraced. And Twitter, will always say, sure, write that, we'll read that,
They are the ultimate enabler, and they're the reason why a lot of my books exist, because I was like, surely I can't do this. And Twitter's like, you can do it. You told me to do it, Twitter.
Yeah, we're throwing money at you that me. So yeah, great. Speaking of Twitter, how has social media affected your career? I mean, has it broadened your fan base? Which one do you prefer if you have a preference? But talk about social media in your career.
I would say it's been an instrumental part of it, but it's one of those things that I try to be cautious when I give advice on, because I started in 2011, 2012, which was a very different environment than it is now. And so I came into the now with, somewhat of a base established. Like when I started, Facebook groups were a thing, and that was a thing we did. And now it's like Facebook is it's hopping in some places, but not so much in others.
Right.
I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter. Sometimes I really love it. Sometimes it makes me very sad. Like, I feel like everybody, it's sometimes you just get whiplash. And it seems like once you hit a certain threshold of platform, it becomes like really weird. And I used to love Instagram because it's like pretty pictures, like no matter what's going on in the world, it's pretty pictures. Show me your dog. I would love to see what you're eating. It makes me so happy to see whatever. But now the culture over there has changed a little bit, and the like the courtesy between like reviewers and authors that are on pretty much every other social media platform doesn't exist there. And so you'll see this beautiful picture and be like, wow, that's my book, and I got tagged and it's beautiful, and go to like it and it'll be like 2 stars, this author should never write again. And you're like, oh, okay, that's not my business. But I really like TikTok, which I think it's the ADHD, because it's just like such a, like in the serotonin of the being able to scroll, and the fact that like I was really intimidated by it for a very long time. But as soon as I realized that I can just like post videos of me like in my writing gear, which is like a headband and a hoodie, and like nobody cares, nobody expects me to have my face on,
right?
And they really appreciate like authenticity. And so for now, TikTok is my favorite. But I do think that social media is lovely, but like it can feel like you're walking around with a target on your back, like because people just like sometimes just want to fight.
Yeah.
And I have the problem, I guess that's a problem, I don't know, I just assume everybody's coming in good faith, which is silly because the internet, that's not how the internet works at all. So like when people criticize me, I'm like, oh, you're right, I am a bad, and it's like, wait, no, hold on. I mean, sometimes legitimate, but sometimes it's, very much a bad faith argument. So negotiating those and like getting good boundaries has been a challenge. Increasingly.
Understand. Okay. Now, according to the web, Katee Robert has 16 series, 3 standalones, for a grand total of 62 books. And this is not counting all of the anthologies that you contributed to. That's a ton of work for someone whose first book was published when?
About 10 years ago.
I often tease Brenda Jackson, she's a good friend, about being Queen Nora's love child because she's so prolific and so productive. I think I may have to add you to that family tree as well. So tell me about your process. What's a writing day look like for you?
It is, I'm a creature of habit in that I have up for the longest time would have to write every day. Otherwise it's almost like I forget how. And so usually these days, because this is the first year my youngest has been in school. So I've been like writing with a child in home and learning to write in like 15-minute sprints in between somebody asking me for something. So this year it's been lovely because I get up, I do some admin stuff, get everybody out of the door, in between the illnesses and like the COVID at home and like all, and then I usually write for as long as it takes to hit whatever my word count is, because I am a creature of data. And so I'm like, here's my deadline, reverse engineer, take out the weekends so I have a cushion if I need it. And what's my minimum word count I need to hit a day?
Yeah.
And then I just hit that every single, life happens. And I'm moving a bit slower than I have been in the past, just because I went into the pandemic being like, I'm just going to work until I don't need to process any emotions ever. And so I put out like a truly absurd number of books, but you can't maintain that pace. And so now I'm intentionally trying to slow down. It doesn't seem like I'm slowing down, but I promise I am.
Good.
So I write, maybe 2,000 words a day, and then have lunch, do the thing, and then like admin or take a break or read a book or something in the afternoon. And then the kids home and it's family stuff.
Yeah. So you're a pantser or a plotter, or somewhere in between?
Somewhere in between. I usually have like broad stroke. Like I like to go into a book knowing, here's the characters, like their character archetype, and here's the tropes I'm working with, which kind of gives me the framework to like keep the bumpers on. Or like in the Dark Olympus series, I did a very, very rough sketch of like the series as a whole, just to like keep the end goal in mind. So I usually know the end and know the characters and know the tropes, and then just go and see what happens and where we end up. It's always much smarter than if I try to write a synopsis and then try to follow the synopsis, because I find a better way as I'm writing.
Yeah. So do you write linear?
Most of the time. I've found that sometimes if I get stuck, it's easier for me just to put in brackets, like here's what the scene will be, and skip to the next bit, and then come back and fill it in when it feels ready. But I do write from beginning to end, even if there's holes in the middle.
Okay. So you're an author with another gazillion books in your future. You have a family, you got pets, and a life outside of writing. How do you balance all that and not want to run away from home or lose your mind?
I mean, I will say I do threaten to run away to the woods probably once a week. Just gonna go live as a lady of the woods. I don't know, except I'm not really an outdoor kid, so it wouldn't work out. But it's sometimes I balance better than others. There's usually 2 or 3 times a year where balance goes out the window and I'm under 3 deadlines, and it's just like, sorry kids, thankfully they can all feed themselves, so it's like, good luck, order Uber Eats, see you in 3 days.
Right.
But I found that just having the schedule and just being like, okay, I don't work evenings 90% of the time. I don't work evenings, so it allows me to be present for the family. I took up knitting, which I don't know how that's going to work out because my hands are, being cranky, but I took up knitting so I could be present with the family, because the ADHD thing means my hands need to be busy. And so I was spending too much time on my phone, which means I'm totally checked out.
Yeah.
So I've just kind of had to be very intentional about it, because it's so easy to just be like, oh, I'll just check Instagram. And then I'm like working essentially.
Right.
And I try hard not to work weekends, but again, sometimes it happens anyways.
Okay. So do you keep Katee Robert, the writer, separate from Katee, the real person?
I think Katee Robert, the writer, is Katee, but just more like, it's me and it's the things, but it's just me without like the insecurities. like
Okay.
so like on the internet, I will just I joke that I'm Katee to the nth degree. So it's just a little more extra, a little more outrageous, a little more less nothing holding me back. Whereas in real life, it's more like I'm like, here's all the things that could go wrong with this scenario. And so maybe we just won't do that. And online, I'm like, I'm gonna write something really crazy.
Yeah. So you're a little bit more introverted
Yes,
than Katee the
absolutely.
writer. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I try and keep Miss Bev separate from Beverly. Miss Bev has her own wardrobe and all of that, you know. So yeah, it's important, I think, to have those boundaries. Otherwise, you start believing all the shit you see online and stuff.
Yeah, you definitely internalize all this stuff. Whereas if it's like, oh no, they're they're talking about Katee, the author, it's definitely a little easier to be less delicate about some like criticisms and whatnot.
Yeah. So most importantly, you're talking about balance. What do you do for self-care after 3 deadlines and constant typing and just craziness of that part of our lives as writers? What do you do for self-care? Because it's so important.
Yes. I usually at the end of like the deadline when my brain is just like, nope, I read a lot. Not recently because it's scheduling. I'm about to come out of the crazy deadline and read a lot. Or I like to input, like either like I'll go on like nonfiction binges where I just like will pick a subject to hyper fixate on and just like inhale a bunch.
Mhm.
My husband usually drags me out to do house projects and stuff. He's like, get out into the sun. I don't know, like get some vitamin D, talk to a human being. He's really good about reminding me that it's been a month since I've seen any friends in real life. And so it's good to like go do the thing. So I try to make sure that when I meet up with friends, like writer friends or friends, that we schedule the next thing before we leave,
Okay.
because everybody's busy and it's super easy to be like, oh, we'll do that. And then 6 months go by and we haven't seen each other. And so just kind of, yeah, so it's socialization. There's a little bit of knitting, a lot of reading. I used to pre-pandemic go sit in bars and read books with no one talking to me, and it was lovely. But that hasn't really been an option for the last couple of years.
Yeah, yeah. Pandemic. Okay, I'm winding down. I see our time is, we could do this till Tuesday.
Yeah.
Your latest, Wicked Beauty, debuted June the 7th, which is why we're here. It's book 3 in the Dark Olympus series. Tell us a little bit about the series and then a little bit about Wicked Beauty.
So the Dark Olympus series is kind of the Katee Robert spin on Greek mythology, which is to say it's not classical. It's me taking, again, the archetypes of the various characters in myth and kind of inserting them into a contemporary-ish world where there's always a Zeus, but it's not always the same Zeus. So there's like a title system, and it's a lot of like power games and like what powerful people will do to stay in power and like how people move through that world who don't necessarily want to play the games. And book 3 is Helen, Achilles, and Patroclus. And it's basically Zeus, who is Helen's brother because of title stuff, it decides that the winner of the next Aries title will also win Helen as their bride, which, you know, because Helen's always been in myth like passed around essentially, and she's the prize to be won. And Helen's not super into that idea, so she decides she's going to compete to be Aries on her own. And it just so happens she's also competing against Achilles and Patroclus, who are partners in an open relationship, who Achilles wants that Aries title, and they butt heads and do sexy stuff and have a lot of angsty, messy shenanigans against this sort of tournament arc as they compete to become the next Aries.
Yeah. This is not your first polyamorous romance. So when you set up a poly, romance, and you do your character arcs and you build your characters, how different is working with 3 than 2? And what's different? Is it different, or?
It's different in that there's a couple extra steps, because when you have 2, it's like, okay, we have like the grumpy and the sunshine or what have you, and with 3, it's like, okay, so we have, I can't remember which ones I did, but like we have Achilles is like the arrogant, like he's the one who walks in any room and owns it. Patroclus is the very like thinker. He's the intense, like he's going to think 10 steps ahead and probably talk himself out of the action before he gets there. And Helen is kind of her and Achilles are very similar in that they're both very proud, arrogant people, but she's got kind of a brittle center, that because she's always been seen as just a pretty face, whereas Achilles has always been, yes, you are the best, like congratulations, high five. And so when I build a trio, it's kind of like, how can I balance? I usually start with 2, and then it's like, how do I balance out? And I usually actually draw a diagram of like, because it's 3 relationships inside the main one,
Right.
And each needs to feel unique in order for that to feel like a good, like it's not like lopsided or not doing the work it needs to do. So yeah, I usually draw a diagram and like make notes off each bracket so that I make sure I have it really balanced before I go into it.
Yeah, because they have to be equal. Otherwise, like you said, the triangle will trip over. So
yeah,
they don't want that. Okay. So how many books are going to be in this series?
I have 10 planned, 10, which is ridiculous. And again, I keep expecting somebody to tell me no. They're like, no, we are not going to write a 10-book traditional series, but no one's told me no yet. So I guess we're so far 7 are contracted. We'll see what happens.
So what's coming up next after? I see you're redoing the monster.
Yes, I do have my next monster book coming out this fall, which is the Kraken Sacrifice, and he is a Kraken gentleman, and there's the cover. I mean, the cover tells you everything you need to know. Right. And the next book in Dark Olympus will be Radiant Sin, which comes in February, and it's Cassandra and Apollo, and I joke that it's a Katee Robert slow burn in that they have sex at 50% instead of 10%. So like a normal book. So we'll see how that resonates with people. It's very much a different vibe than the 3 that have come before. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm so excited that you're here. I've been trying to be cool this whole time, but I'm very starstruck.
Well, you shouldn't be. I'm just me. I think Anna's going to come back in and deal with questions if there are any.
Yes. Okay. Good. Yep. All right. So the first question is from Victoria. Says, the obstacle courses for Aries were so interesting. What was your inspiration for each obstacle?
So I'm not gonna lie, the first one was straight up like Ninja Warrior or American Ninja Warrior, I guess, which is more known these days over here. And I knew the third one would be combat no matter what, just because as a throwback to the Iliad. The second one didn't exist when I first wrote it because I was like, I don't want to. And my editor's like, Katee, why did you say there'd be 3 trials and you didn't write a second trial? Like, could we see the second trial? And I'm like, yeah, no, that's fair. And so the maze came because the Minotaur and Theseus are contenders for the Aries. And I was like, well, the maze makes sense. And it ended up being a really perfect way to play out the dramas that happened during the second trial. So my editor, as usual, was right.
And I think I saw a diagram of the upcoming series. Is the Minotaur going to be in one of the future books?
Yes. I met a villain that I don't want to write their book? Paris. Yes, Paris. Paris will never get a book. But like when it comes to the ones that have not, like, they're bad, but are they like bad? I don't know. He doesn't deserve a book, but he's going to get one all the same.
Right, this is not so much a question, but Victoria also says the Deal with the Demon series has me in an absolute chokehold. Never read monster romances before, and now I'm obsessed.
That's the highest of compliments, because there are so many good ones out there. I definitely recommend CM Nacosta, and again, Jack Harbin's His Beauty, and Tiffany Roberts all kind of have that same vibe if you're looking for more.
All right, and so I know you just said the Dark Olympus is planned for 10. Do you feel kind of stuck in that series? Are you still feeling passionate about it?
Yes,
Okay.
so I had planned, I knew where we were headed from the beginning. And so it's very exciting to, like, every book we inch a little bit closer, but it also helps that my editor is like, I honestly don't know how she gets away with it, because I'm used to editor, like I said, there's a lot of people telling no, so that even if your editor would say yes, they will say no, because in marketing it's like, we can't sell that book. And however she's managing it, she is like always like, yes, and so, which is how we're getting an open poly knot in book 5. Numbers are hard. Book 5 is 4 people and 4 points of view, and like, it's so exciting and challenging to work with somebody who pushes me in a way that I've never quite been pushed before, which keeps it feeling very fresh, even when I'm wanting to rip my hair out, because 4 points of view is ridiculous. And like, why did I think this was a good choice? But the books are becoming stronger, at least for me, in the writing of it, because I'm working with somebody who's helping me kind of push the envelope a little bit.
Great.
And Amber says, will we see more of the 2 Hades? I read the Patreon short and loved it.
So there's not in the main series, but I keep writing extra content for it. So there's a Hades and Persephone holiday novella that I'm sure adult or daddy older the elder Hades the Elder will make an appearance, I'm sure. Now I'm blushing. Oh god. Yes, a professional at all times. Okay, but yeah, I'm sure that they'll have some family stuff going on for that event. I just haven't plotted anything, so we'll just see how it goes.
Okay.
And you have sort of started alluding in Wicked Beauty a little more to the boundary of Olympus. Are we going to learn more about how that functions as the series goes on?
So I should not admit this, but I'm going to. The boundary is something that, well, partly, like, I came to a point in actually book 4 that it's like, okay, I can either explain how this actually works, or it feels more authentic for the story structure, that it's like, okay, the boundary's failing, but like, we don't know how to fix it, because we don't actually know what it is, because the records have been destroyed. Just because, like, how many things do we just take as like fact now that we have no idea where it sources from, like the average citizen? And so it's like, okay, like, and having that be a conflict point of, there's a panic of sorts within the 13, because if the boundary falls, then like life as they know it in Olympus will change to, like, they don't know what's going to happen. Right. And so it ended up being a really great conflict point moving forward in the series, to just be like, it's failing, we're on a timetable, it's going to fall at some point, maybe, we don't know, oh god. So it's kind of that clicking or ticking clock through the series starting in book 4.
That's great. Can't wait. Can't wait.
And then sorry, go ahead, Ms. Bev.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask how you manage keeping straight when you're working on a monster romance and the Olympus series at the same time, like organizationally, especially as someone with ADD. How do you?
Scrivener is a lifesaver, just because that ADHD thing where your short-term memory or your memory in general is like a little wonky. Every time I've tried to use other software that's like, oh, my timeline will be on this other software, I forget it exists and I never look at it again. So with Scrivener, I have like all my character cards. When I introduce a character, I will plot or throw in like a detail about him, or if like I find out something about an ongoing character, I try to put the notes in there so that like when it comes time to write Zeus's story, there's going to be 47 notes in there because so I don't forget like the little ticks and stuff. And then the timeline is always open of like, what time of year is it? I don't know. So thankfully Scrivener, you can like split the screen. So I always have the timeline up there. So I know like big events or like what time of year it is, or if somebody's like pregnant, like how far along are they, so that I can keep those things consistent, because without that, their eye color is going to change, their name might change. I'm not great at details unless I force myself to be great at details by taking a bunch of notes.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions too. What kind of software do you use?
Only Scrivener. Yeah, I mean, I use Word I draft in Scrivener, but as soon as it's done, it just gets copy and pasted into Word. I do all my edits in Word, which is really weird now that I think of it, but for some reason it works.
Yeah. What's your editing process like?
So I write relatively clean, and like I said, I make notes to myself if I figure stuff out. So like I will write a rough draft and then go back and like fill in any brackets, or if I realized halfway through that like Helen and Patroclus were childhood friends, I go back and make sure I see that through, so that it something I figured out along the way, instead of going back and editing in the midst, because if I do that, I'll never move forward. And then once I do that read through, where I fix all the things, I send it to my editor, whether it's my freelance editor that I work with the same one pretty much every time, or my traditional editor. And both of them are like, we've worked together enough that I trust them implicitly. So they send me notes, and then it's usually 2 or 3 passes for traditional and 1 pass, and then like 2 more with different editors for independent, just because I like copy editing and proofing and whatnot.
Yeah. Okay. Your turn, Anna.
And then Amber came back and asked, was the boundary failing foreshadowed by Zuriel coming and going in Wicked Villain?
So Zuriel is related to is Triton's daughter, and Triton is related to Poseidon. And I don't know, this is the problem with writing a bunch of bonus content for these series, because I don't know if I established it in the main series or if it was like one of the random novellas or whatever that I wrote. But Poseidon's bloodlines, like his family members, can pass through the boundary. So she, as one of his like relatives, was able to pass through, which the boundary didn't really exist when I wrote Wicked Villains. So it's a really great that like past me figured that out, and it actually fits with like what I had established when I wrote started the Dark Olympus series.
Got a lot going on, girl.
Yeah. I'm really grateful that my intuition, or like whatever the hindbrain is, like much smarter than me, because I get somewhere and I'm like, oh, this is smart, and then I was like, oh, I figured that out without figuring that out. Like, good job, me. I guess we'll just keep it works.
I think that's the pantser part of you.
Yeah,
that's the pantser part. Very good. All right, we got any more questions?
There's no more questions from the audience. I do just want to take a minute and mention Miss Bev's latest and upcoming books, since she has been such a great conversation partner. We have her backlist in stock right now, including Wild Rain, which was the most recent in the Women Who Dared series. And she's got To Catch a Raven coming also in that series, August 23rd. We have signed book plates from both Miss Bev and from Katee Robert. So if you buy any of their books from our store, either through the website, we'll ship them with it, or if you're local in store, then you will get signed book plates, which is awesome. I got to read an advanced copy of To Catch a Raven, Miss Bev, and it is steamy, and I loved it.
Well, good to hear. Good to hear. Glad you got the book plates too.
Yes.
Yeah.
They came in yesterday.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Very good. All
right. So before we wrap up, I always like to ask, is there anything you guys have been reading lately that you really love? Because I know readers always want to know what their favorite authors are loving too.
All I've been doing is gardening. I've been on, endless deadlines for the last 6 years, and the weeds have always won. because I have always been on a plane going somewhere during the summertime. So not reading a lot. Got a lot on the TBR, but I've been on my knees in the garden for the last 2 months. So nothing read yet. Katie, what you reading?
So I've been on a bit of a reading slump, or not slump per se, but like I've been really busy with deadlines and assigning a bunch of stuff. So I haven't been reading as much, but there's 2 books coming out. One's like at the end of this month and one's in August that I want everyone to read. So the one coming out this month is The Final Strife by Sarah L. Arifi, Arifi. It's like an epic fantasy with like 3 women at the center, and it has some of the coolest world building that I've ever read. And it's got a tournament arc, it's got revenge, it's got a queer like enemies to friends to lovers sort of subplot romance going on in it, and it is just delicious, and I highly recommend it. And that comes out this month. And then in August is a taste of golden iron, or a touch of, I think it's a taste of golden iron, by Alexandra Rowland. It is also epic fantasy, or not epic, but epic fantasy, otherworld fantasy, that has some of the best, in my like just personal experience, anxiety rep I've ever read. And it's a men loving men like romance that's like really angsty with between the prince and this bodyguard, and it's just, again, just delightful. I was grinning the whole time and just felt so good at the end. And and it has one of the best covers I've seen lately, that's just had me slipping into Tor's DMs and being a total weirdo and being like, can I have this book, please don't block me, but like also I'd really like to read it.
Great.
Okay, so one more question popped up in the attendee Q&A, and I have to ask it. It says, how did you think of 2 penises for the Dragon's Bride?
So this is actually, I didn't. I found this artist because she did fan art of the Hades video game, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. I ended up on her Patreon because her art's really amazing. And she opens commissions up once a month, and I was like, oh, like eventually I want to write this dragon man, like I would like, a not safe for work art piece from you. And so I kind of like gave the pitch of like the couple, and she's like, well, so normally for like dragon types, I do like a hemipene, like the lizards have, like, is that cool? And I was like, it is now. And so that is what's going to happen. And so that is how it came to be, is that this artist was like, well, normally I do this, and drew it. And I was like, well, that's cool. And so we're going to do it. I don't know how it's going to work out, but we're going to figure it out together.
I love it. Great.
All right. Well, thank you, ladies, so much. This was such a fabulous conversation. I am so excited we got to host. It has been an honor to be with 2 romance legends this evening.
Thank
you so much for having us.
I had a great time. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Miss Bev.
Everybody have a good night.
Thank you.